Hello, I'm Dane Rose, and my purpose for this video is to walk you through a series of points and distinctions that I hope will lead you to making a better choice, either to work together and understand the process and be satisfied in the end, or not to work together and to understand your reason for doing that. Now, when I began the company more than 25 years ago at age 17, I started out doing maintenance. And I think it's a good place to start because maintenance over time can cost more than initial installation. It's not uncommon if you really do your work and have a full service maintenance company that keeps the mulch up, that replaces dying plants, that prunes appropriately, that fixes drip in the irrigation, to spend $5,000 to $20,000 a year on effective maintenance. Now, most people will be on the lower end of that. But my point is, even if you spend $5,000 a year to top off the mulch, keep the drip, refresh the plants, fertilize everything, and keep everything, pressure washed and looking nice, over 10 years, that's $50,000. Over 20 years, that's $100,000. And it's not uncommon for people to spend $50,000 maintaining something over time that they spent $10,000 to put in and was rather poorly thought out. And so you want to design and install something that's worth maintaining. And you also want to design and install in a way to lower maintenance, because maintenance is your chronic long-term cost. So it's a good place to start. Next, I began doing installation, and clients started asking me what they should do. And I always found this a little bit odd because I had no idea what they should do, and I'm not psychic. Clients live in their own home, have their own taste. And my job is to make clients' living experience more enjoyable. At least that's how I see it. And so I started mentoring and apprenticing to actually architects because I couldn't find landscape designers at the time that were able to articulate what they were doing and why. The other thing that I began experiencing time after time is the problem of the flawed design process. And it would work like this. A client would come to me and say, I want to install this garden. Looked lovely on paper. They'd give me these 2 by 3 foot blueprints with all these little flowery curves and, P's for podocarpus and RH for rhododendron, and there'd be legends on the side and absolutely magnificent drawings. And I'd ask them how much they paid for the drawings, and they'd say $1,000, $2,000, $5,000. Client the other day gave me a set of drawings that we didn't use at all and had paid $11,000 to create a magnificent set of flowery drawings. And I would ask the clients, how many cars do you want to park in this driveway? How many hours a week do you want to spend maintaining this landscape? If you're not going to maintain it yourself, how much money are you willing to spend to maintain this garden? Do you want a place for garbage cans? Do you need a place for a future hot tub? Will you ever get an RV? And where will that be parked? And what about a boat? And do you want this house to be, or this garden to be, wheelchair accessible? And how much do you want it to cost? Now, what would, really stun me is that these questions had never come up between the client and the designer. They'd ask me to install this project, or at least give them a price, and I would give them a price, and they'd say, that's way more than we want to spend. And I'd say, you're stuck now, because you've spent $5,000 for these drawings. And statistically, I'm the medium to low bidder, meaning this drawing has materials in it that cost more than you want to spend for the entire project. Didn't this come up in your conversation with the landscape designer? Didn't you tell them, we want to spend this amount of money? Didn't they ask you before spending $5,000 of your money to draw this all out? It didn't come up. And this seemed like something that if I was the client, I'd be upset about. I don't want to spend $5,000 for a bunch of drawings I'm not going to do anything with. But the other factor that bothered me was these were beautiful drawings. They might cost $300,000 to install, but magnificent. And why pump a client's hopes up like that? I don't like being shopping, going out shopping and being shown Ferraris and this and that and the other. And then when it comes time to learn that I want to spend $15,000 for a used car, that every single thing that I've been shown is 10 times out of my budget. I want to be shown things that work for me. And so the other thing that would have happened during installing other people's design is the client would come out in the middle of the project and mention something. By the way, Dane, good to see you. I don't know if we mentioned it, but next year we're getting a hot tub and putting it up there. And I'd say, no, you didn't mention it, and it's not in these drawings. But more importantly, for you to have a hot tub up there, you need to run electrical conduit up through this area in this bed and this bed. And that needs to go in right now. Because otherwise, you're going to have to tear up all this stuff you're paying us to do this year, to trench through all this irrigation line next year, and it's going to be 3 times more expensive. You've got to think ahead. And so this just seemed a maddening amount of chaos. And so what's the response? Well, my response is the landscape questionnaire. Now, this is 8 pages or so of every question that every client I've known wished they had considered before developing a design or doing a certain stage. Because one of the things to understand is that you may be doing a project in 5 years, but it often has some relationship with the project you're doing today. You may start with the front, or you may have in the back of your mind that in a certain time in the future you're going to add a water feature up on this back slope. But the electrical line or the water line or the drainage for that water feature may be going in today in the stuff that you're doing now. And so you want to think of the project as a whole. And this is even more important if you're going to be building. I don't deal with raw land that much in Marin, but up on Whidbey Island, where I was developing my design skills about 20 years ago, I would deal with a lot of raw land, lots of native vegetation. And it made a huge difference in cost and overall feel how the builder related the house to the existing native plants. And up there, most of the builders weren't paying attention. And so I made a specialty service of doing site development work where I would participate in the land clearing of natives, the house placement, the driveway work, and I even became a general contractor for a couple of years because I thought this was so important to get right. People put a lot of focus in my industry on learning to memorize the 4,500 Latin names of plants. But you can rattle off Latin names till the cows come home and still not have a clue as to how to place a house elevation on a piece of land so as to positively affect drainage and reduce the cost of land development while being more aesthetic. And these types of things are often not taught. This ties into, a really important coming together. You can learn about design on an aesthetic level. You can learn about installation on a technical level. But the real value comes from bringing these two together into one art, where you're designing with a very clear understanding of the amount of hours involved in technically installing and then maintaining it. If you can design with that goal and end in mind, with competency, your design doesn't cost any more money. Meaning, you can pay someone $2,000 to develop a crappy, expensive, inefficient design that does not add much to property value. Or you can pay someone the same amount of money that saves you $30,000 with one idea while simultaneously adding to property value while lowering maintenance and leaving a more satisfied client. The power is in the intelligence of the idea and understanding how that idea affects each of these different areas. And of course, this is, a major issue when, choosing where to place a house and, doing a large site with acreage. And not all that relevant to, putting in a pansy garden, by the front door. But design intelligence has impact, and it has more impact the bigger the project and the longer the period of time. This is also true in plant selection. So let me illustrate. If you buy a $200 olive tree that's over the next 20 years, requires regular spraying, regular fruit cleaning up, regular pruning, and, tree care, etc., that costs you $10,000 over the next 20 years. Or you buy an identically sized olive for the same amount of money that is pest resistant and low fruiting, and delete that $10,000 cost. The decision, which takes about 5 seconds of time, is the most potent decision you can possibly make, because it is a decision that in 5 seconds determines whether you do or do not spend $10,000 maintaining a plant that provides no extra value for the additional maintenance. And that's an illustration of the value of choosing more attractive, lower maintenance, longer lasting, hardier, pest-resistant plants over the alternatives. So you could say that design at its heart is the process of delivering more value to the homeowner, to the client, per unit of energy invested. And this is also parallel with ecology, because in any ecological movement, what you're looking at is conservation of energy. It's hard on the environment to have something made in China and shipped all the way across the globe using fossil fuels and then delivered to the site that then falls apart rapidly and must be extracted and shipped across the globe again. And generally speaking, what saves energy saves money, because all energy costs something. And so good designs are looking to give you more value, more resale value, more of what you want, more stability, more privacy faster, whatever it is that you're desiring with less energy, which generally correlates to being more sustainable. Now, that's true in the design result. It's also true in the design process. Now, I mentioned those 2 by 3 foot flowery drawings, often called blueprints, which are often the deliverable that you get when you hire a landscape architect or a landscape designer to design your landscape. Now, one of the things that I realized is that it takes me 30% of the time to understand the client and develop the idea and communicate that idea to the client with photographs, with books such as the one I'll be showing you shortly. And it takes me about 70% of the energy to turn that idea into a blueprint, into a scaled drawing that articulates the idea. In other words, you're paying 30% for the idea and 70% for an elaborate expression of that idea. Now, the other thing that I learned is that as a designer installer, meaning I install more than 90% of everything that I design, I don't look at my drawings because I'm too busy looking at the landscape on a daily basis. Meaning I'm going to trust my eye on the site day after day more than I'm going to trust what I thought my eye would like at the very beginning of the project. And this brings up an interesting point, which is that a landscape architect or designer creates that flowery drawing after only spending 1, 2, maybe 3 hours on the site. But the more one installs a project, it might take a couple of hours to grasp the landscape and do some measurements, but then it takes weeks at a time to install, to build a wall, to do the excavating, etc. The more time you spend with a client and the more time you spend with a project, the more you understand them, the more you consider all the options. So it's rather unfortunate that the design gets made and concretized at a time when the person making the design knows the client and the site minimally, and that the installer gets to know the site more and more and the client more and more, but is pinned to the original design. And so a lot of what I do is create that initial concept and idea, and then I'll use spray chalk to draw out my lines on the site, and photographs and sketches to bring the ideas to life to a client in real time, and then talk about the costs of those ideas. Because in 4 hours of going through kind of a brainstorming process in the project, after understanding what's important to my client, I can get to the point where 90% of my ideas will get built. And then when I'm installing those ideas, I can do a little bit of fine-tuning after getting to know the site more. Now, the benefit in savings to the client is 70% of total design costs, meaning the $11,000 design costs that we just threw out on my present job for a $300,000 design that my clients couldn't afford was replaced by a $1,200 design process with just a little sketch and spray painted lines, and regularly checking in with the client. We had another little meeting today to discuss preferences and how things are going. Because even if the client says, I love that drawing, it does not mean that the client perceives from a black and white drawing what something actually looks like as it's being built. And the problem with that is the client can approve a drawing based on a picture in their head that is not what the drawing specifies. And the best way to avoid that is to check in with the client regularly and show samples. This is the stone among all the stones that could have been chosen. Do you like it? This is the pattern of all the patterns that could be chosen. Do you like it? This is the spacing between the stone. This is the finish of this stone. Do you like it? And with that check-in, if you like each of those points, the client's going to love the finished project. If not, you've got to pivot and change right there and educate the client on the costs of any changes. It could be, in an ideal world, that a client actually likes an approach cheaper than that spec'd out, more than the more expensive approach. I like that rough look of the stone more than that smooth look, and the rough stone is cheaper. So you get a tremendous return on value with that shift, and it's one of the reasons that costs are an important part of the education process or the design process. It's not just, do you like it? Do you like it at this price point? Because here's what it cost. Now, I wrote this book, Successfully Landscaping Your Marin Home, because 80% of all the questions I get asked are the same. How do I deal with marin soil? Where should I go and get compost? Is this plant deer resistant? How do I mix this soil? How do you do, how should I do the drip irrigation? What should I do with pruning here? Or what's a good design approach for something like this? And so rather than charge clients money, and currently, as I make this video, design fees are $175 per hour. Rather than charge people money to repeat myself, I wanted to put 75% of everything that I know into this book, which has all kinds of chapters on deer management, on landscaping over septic systems, integrating with the building process. And it's not the best book or attempting to be the best book. It's attempting to be the best book for marin, which isn't terribly hard because it's the only book specifically for marin. But that's what makes it useful, is referencing local suppliers, local sources. And if you read it in this book, it's relevant to your landscape. Now, this book has no pictures and is $20 on Amazon. I usually keep some in the truck as well. As a design client, I give a copy to every one of my clients because I want clients to understand as much as possible. If both people are educated, there's more likelihood we'll be on the same page. And that brings up another point, which is that I'm a listening style of designer. Meaning, I don't care what you do, as long as you are informed, understand the consequences of doing it, and believe that it will make you happy. I really don't care about anything else other than ensuring that you get something that you value out of the relationship. Now, if you're telling me you want the home to be appropriate for the neighborhood, or that you want to maximize resale value, which is one of the answers, one of my questions. How important is it to you that what we do delivers strong return on investment when you sell? Well, if that's your primary drive, I have very strong opinions because I've interviewed realtors, I've interviewed appraisers, I've built and sold homes, and I've interviewed people who have bought the homes that I've landscaped. And so I have a strong sense of what the majority of the market appreciates. And so I will take the lead if you tell me you want it to have good resale value. I will also take the lead if you ask me to take the lead. But my default impulse is to listen to you, to understand what makes you happy, and try and use my skill to bring that out of your garden. Now, the next book that I created, which is Marin Landscape Design, I created for another reason. It's not so much of a knowledge dispenser as a container of 600 local images. And so, for example, one of my favorite reference points is great Marin plants. Now, my definition of a great Marin plant is that it's available. And so every plant in this chapter, I can get it at my wholesaler. It's drought tolerant. Why not? It's deer resistant, since most of Marin gardens have exposure to deer in at least some portion of the garden. It has year-round interest rather than just looking good some of the time. And it's not going to require fungicide and, aphid sprays and this and that and the other. Because why put in a fussy plant when you can put in a plant that's relatively easy and just as beautiful? And so, if I look at and show a client these little thumbnails, and they like them, it's a really efficient way to find the plants that are going to deliver lots of value for the same price as other plants. Now, in other areas of this book, let's take this section here where we have surfaces or driveways. Now, I'm not trying to tell people what they should like. I'm an educator, and so I'm going to say that this is a bumpy driveway with all these rocks, but it looks very rustic, and here's the cost. This is a smooth look. It looks like this, and here's the cost. I want people to understand the maintenance implication, the resale implication, the style implication of different looks, and then I want people to make their own decision. And what I'm doing in this book is I'm showing what's out there. Everything here can be done in Marin by definition because it's already been done. And I think it's a useful benchmark because a lot of the books you can buy on gardening and landscaping, you'll point at a plant that won't grow here, or you'll point at a rock that you can't buy here. And it's just not useful as a reference point. Now, in the material section of this book, I show all the materials that are available. We need some mulch. You want this mulch, this mulch, this mulch, this mulch. Take your pick. Here's the cost per yard. We need mulch, but do you want to have to drive to the quarry or to the materials yard to pick it? Or do you want to save time and point? So the goal of these books is to save my clients time. And so, when we're picking out rocks and boulders, I want that boulder. Okay, that gives me an idea of your style. And then the other thing in the back is I try and explain to clients a range of styles that I'm familiar installing, one, and also what they cost. Like this wall in this drawing cost this amount for this reason. This other wall in this other portfolio section cost this amount for this reason. And those costs are really important to making a decision. You may say this is a nice bracelet and thumbs up when you learn it costs $30 on Amazon. You may say this is a nice bracelet, but thumbs down that you learn it costs $3,000 at some expensive custom jewelry maker. You just don't value it enough to pay $3,000. And so cost is relevant to every decision. Cost and maintenance, which is the long-term cost, cost as cash flow, which is the short-term cost when you install. And so my process is relatively analytical, as you can tell, and it's relatively thorough, as you can tell. But the goal is to do that intelligently, meaning if it takes an extra hour now to save you 10 hours maintaining 3 plants over the next 10 years, what's more intelligent? To save an hour now and spend 10 hours fussing over the next 10 years? Or to spend the hour now making a good decision? So I'm looking at the overall picture. And really what I'm trying to do is take what's now 27 years of design, client, horticultural installation expertise and make the decisions that I believe you would make if you had my knowledge, but your imagination and your taste and your values. Because if I can succeed at doing something that 10 years from now you look back and say, that was a really good thing that I did. I know more about it now, and the more I know about it, the more I like what I did. That's a good result. If the more you understand yourself and what was done and all the options, the more you regret what we did, it means we skimped, we failed in the design process. So the most passionate and highly leveraged moment in an entire professional relationship and in the entire creative process that is your landscape is the design process, is those little decisions that take 5 seconds to go this way or this way, but impact your entire life, the value of the property, how much money and hassle you spend maintaining it. And my passion is for seeing that those pivot points benefit you and your project.